While nearly every ancient Near Eastern culture shared a common worldview, that of a three-tiered cosmology, whose origins are rooted in a deity or deities bringing order to the primordial chaos, the process of how this order was achieved differed significantly between the accounts, most notably to the biblical account. Now, in the Babylonian creation story of Enuma Elish, this order is achieved through combat. More specifically, it's the story of the creator god's struggle against the power of chaos to establish the world. In summary, there's a group of high gods that emerge from the commingling of Tiamat, who is the salt water in the ocean, and also the chaotic sea monster, sea serpent, or sea dragon from the account, and Apsu, who is the fresh water under the earth. However, due to various circumstances, Apsu tries to kill the gods, but he is slain by Ea, the god of wisdom. This causes Tiamat to attack the gods, who then call on Ea's son, Marduk, to fight on their behalf. And Marduk kills Tiamat, and then uses her carcass to create the world. He splits her, stretches out half of her to form the heavens, and establishes the other half as the earth and the underworld. Now, in Egypt, there were 4 major versions of the same basic mythic creation cycle. And while there are slight variations between the 4 accounts, they mostly follow the same basic storyline. And that is, out of the primordial waters, the creator god Atum emerged, or was self-generated. And Atum proceeds to generate the Ennead, which is a group of 8 Egyptian deities that are ultimately worshipped and contribute in some way, shape, or fashion to the creation of the world and of Egypt. Now, the biblical creation myth differs from these accounts in 2 unique ways. First, that God exercises complete control over the chaos. There's no battling against other deities to achieve order over the chaos, or God creating other divine beings to assist in the creation of the world, or God simply emerging out of the nothingness. He simply just is in the biblical text, and throughout the entire biblical narrative, that is the understanding. The other difference, which we already hit on a little bit, is that all of the other accounts outside of the biblical narrative portray a polytheistic religious worldview, whereas in the biblical text, it is one unique God. It is a monotheistic worldview. Now, it is important to note that the definition of biblical monotheism differs from our current understanding of what monotheism is. And if you want to know more on that topic, I'll link a video in the description below. Now we're going to shift on to the creation of human beings within these various accounts. And the 2 areas of focus for this are going to be how the human beings were created and the role in which they were created to serve. Returning to Egypt, the creation of humanity is rare in Egyptian text, but there is one text, the coffin text, that suggests that human beings were born from the tears shed from Atum's eyes. The text reads, "I made the gods evolve from my sweat, while people are from the tears of my eye." Shifting over to the Sumerian creation accounts of human beings, the Genesis mentions the creations of humans and animals by a set of gods. And there's also the Atrahasis epic, which is an old Babylonian or Mesopotamian narrative that recounts the creation of human beings as well as the flood. Now, in terms of the creation of human beings, this comes about at a council of the great gods because the lesser gods have been complaining. And so what ends up happening is that one of the lesser gods is killed, and the blood of that god is mixed with clay to form the human beings. And this is in sharp contrast and far less graphic than what we find in the second creation account in Genesis 2-3, where a mist is going up from the land and watering the whole face of the ground. And from this, the Lord forms the human of dust, or I've also heard it described as mud, from the ground, and then breathes into this human's nostrils the breath of life. And then the human became a living creature. And this is a great transition into the role that human beings play within these tales. And that is that within each of these myths, the Genesis, the Atrahasis, and the Enuma Elish, human beings are created to do the work of the gods, to essentially be slaves for the gods' labor, because the gods were tired of doing the work. And therefore they created human beings to be their workers or slaves. Now, this is a sharp contrast to the biblical text, where human beings are created in the image of God and are placed as God's representatives on earth and are granted dominion over all of the earth, and are also given the role of tending the Garden of Eden, which is the Garden of Paradise. Eden is where heaven meets earth within the biblical narrative. And it's long been recognized that these 2 humans that have been uniquely placed in the Garden of Eden are given a role that aligns with priestly duties within the Israelite religion. And furthermore, human beings within the biblical narrative enjoy a personal relationship with God. And on that point, it is worth mentioning that there are 2 creation accounts in Genesis, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Now, Genesis chapter 1 is the priestly account. It is not as old as Genesis chapter 2. It was written by the priestly class, or the P source, if you're familiar with the JEPD theory. And in Genesis chapter 1, God is the author, creator, and the sustainer of the entire cosmos. He is the supreme deity. And then in chapter 2, which is the J source, or the Yahweh source, viewed as the earliest source amongst the 4 source categories. And J uses anthropomorphic language to describe God walking in the garden with the human beings that he has created. And from here, we get the idea that even from very early on, God was seen as caring for and desiring a personal relationship with the human beings that he created. Now, it is worth mentioning here that there is an Egyptian text known as the Instruction of Merikari, which describes all of humanity being created in the image of God as well. However, there is a very sharp contrast between how human beings were created and also the role in which they were created to serve when comparing the biblical text to the other ancient Near Eastern texts. Now, what typically goes side by side with creation mythologies is flood mythologies. And if you are curious about that, I've covered the comparative flood mythologies in another video, so I'm not going to cover that here, but I will throw a link in the description below if you want to check that out.